Hey, happy Wednesday, everyone. It's time for Wisdom Wednesday. Have a little time this morning, so I thought I would shoot this a little early. Today, I thought I would spend a little time talking about something that kind of happens this time of year. We're all, I think, fairly familiar with the term seasonal affective disorder. And this really is something that has some implications, obviously, about how mood affects us during the time of winter when we have less daylight. And this obviously tells us too how important light is for our overall health and wellness, how light comes into our eyes, how it affects certain ganglia in the eyes, which then affect cellular health and brain health overall. And recently I got to listen to a podcast with a Harvard psychiatrist who has released a new book. And I am reading that book. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I thought I would start with some information because this is going to probably take several weeks to walk through some of the aspects of this. But the idea that mental illness is much more than what we would consider a serotonin deficiency or a dopamine imbalance, something that's imbalanced in our brain, or necessarily, well, it's a genetic issue, my mom had issues, and just really walk through some of the aspects of what we are learning. And as we've been talking, even over the last 2 or 3 years, understanding that a lot of what we see in the body has to do with cellular health. So we're drilling down all the way into the cell, not just this general idea of a deficiency of something that needs a medication. And how can we then approach some of these things in a way that perhaps leads us away from pharmaceuticals and maybe into more lifestyle choices and ways that we can manage this and actually fix things within our brain. So as you know, across the board, we know that depression is probably one of the most common issues that we see, particularly as we enter this time of year. But depression, to meet criteria for a major depression, is something that occurs generally when patients go and see a specialist. A lot of times, many of us deal with some minor sadness or just mood disorder without necessarily reaching all the criteria. But the reality is that 1 in 5 adults currently has what would be considered a mental illness. And throughout anyone's lifetime, 1 out of 2 people will experience a major mental illness and meet the criteria for either a depression issue, and this can go all the way from depression to full-blown schizophrenia and everything in between. And we know that certainly in the last 2.5 years, 3 years, the pandemic has not helped at all. 40% of Americans during this time period were definitely reporting depression, anxiety type symptoms, including substance abuse as well as PTSD. So all of those can be sort of lumped together. And we know that suicide ideations or desire to kill oneself has gone up significantly. When interviewed and surveyed, up to 11% of people may admit that within the previous 30 days there had been some contemplation for killing themselves. And this unfortunately is higher in the 18 to 25-year-old group range. And this has been shown in some surveys to be as much as 25%, or 1 in 4 people between the age of 18 and 25. So this is very significant, horribly problematic, and something that we need to really bring out and talk about. And the thing is that the tools that we use today in medicine really have only been shown to bring about remission, particularly in depression, only about 30% of the time. However, even in that 30% of the time, there have been studies that have followed people out 12 years. Really, only 10% reach a long-lasting remission from depression. So people stay on these medications. So these medications really don't, quote unquote, bring people back into remission a significant amount of time. And this is concerning. We really need to know that we have tools and ways that we can actually help people find a way back to full mental health. And so what we are looking at now is trying to define, well, what causes it? You know, one of the things that particularly in functional medicine or integrative medicine is peeling back and looking at root cause. And when you look at something like major depression or anxiety, there's so many different issues. It could be a vitamin deficiency. It could be a recent traumatic event. There are so many things. People think that it's genetic. And so the idea of this approach to most mental illnesses has come around to this idea of psychosocial type of issues. So biological, psychological, and sociological issues that can bring about. So it can be any or all of those that can somehow be at the root cause. Could you have a genetic or an epigenetic issue? Certainly. Could you have a chemical or a neurotransmitter hormonal imbalance? Yes. Could there have been stress, trauma, abuse, childhood issues? Yes. All of those things can be at the core of what we would define as being the cause of or the initiating issue with, say, anxiety, depression, which is really what we are talking about mostly. We're not talking about full-blown schizophrenia or anything like that. I really want to just focus in on what we see, particularly, as I said, this time of year is this anxiety, depression that we are seeing, and we're seeing it so much more. This is not something that's staying kind of under the radar. We are really seeing a lot of this. I see it a lot in my office. We are seeing it so much more in younger folk in terms of anxiety and depression. And so do you approach this from a psychotherapy standpoint or from a pharmaceutical standpoint? And really, we know that at the end of the day, according to this author that I'm reading right now, Chris Palmer, that none of it really works long term. And so this is fairly disappointing, and especially as a provider trying to know how to help people manage and approach this. And he begins to he goes into the idea that we just have a brain that is not cellularly healthy. And it's not because we're missing a certain chemical or this or that, but that the cells themselves are just dysfunctional. And when you begin to unpackage it from that perspective, you begin to see that just like we see with a lot of other illnesses in the body peripherally, in the brain, there are insulin receptors. And insulin receptors in the brain serve as a signaler as well as a neurotransmitter itself. It doesn't just take glucose and help push it inside the cells. It has a way of influencing metabolism in the brain cells, and it has a way of drilling into mitochondrial function in the brain cells as well. So it appears that overall, it's not just getting enough energy from glucose, that there's much more to it. This is just the beginning of helping us sort of drill down into the cellular health of the brain. And I just wanted to open the doors, if you will, so that in the next few weeks, we are going to look further in and drill into causal type issues and things that we actually can do to help us in terms of getting through this season, helping our loved ones, helping ourselves through periods that are marked with marked anxiety and marked depression. As you probably know and can tell, we're going to be looking at lifestyle issues and diet, nutrition, because it really is going to come down to those types of things. And I will just give you a little bit of a hint too. High carb sugar is going to play into this, and I imagine you can guess this is not going to be a favorable way of approaching it. So just a little bit of a teaser there. We'll talk more next week. Hope you all have a great week and stay in the sunshine as much as you can. Try to continue to eat in a way that optimizes nutrition and focuses in on nutrient density and away from just comfort food. Although this is a season that we just tend to go to comfort food. As we talked last week, you have your days of mindful enjoyment, but then we kind of get back on a good health kick and stay the course of trying to eat more nutritionally favorably for our bodies. Hope you all have a great week. Talk again next week.